3 of the Fair Education Impact Festival. We hope you're having a brilliant festival so far. And as you know, it's running until the 29th of April, so over this week and next. My name is Sam and I am the co-CEO at the Fair Education Alliance, and I'll be supporting this session this morning alongside Tisha, who is head of our Entrepreneurship Award. And a huge welcome to this session, which is called Leading Through Uncertainty and Adapting to Challenge, led by the fantastic Deena Newaz from Impact Ed and Tom Gibbs from Barnardo, who will be sharing his experiences on this topic as well. So throughout the festival, please do tweet and join in on social media using #ImpactFestival and tagging @_the FEA, which you can see on the screen there. And Tish will just put in the chat now. Before we kick off, I just wanted to share a quick introduction to the Fair Education Alliance, why we exist, and a little bit about our awards that are open for application. So as most of you know, the Fair Education Alliance exists because we all believe that no child's educational success should be limited by their socio-economic background. We're a coalition of over 200 organisations from business, charity and education who are all collectively working to make education fair in England. And in addition to our collective action and policy work, we run 3 award programmes which are designed to nurture and scale impactful solutions to end educational inequality. 2 of these awards programmes are currently open for applications until the 18th of May, so we encourage you to consider applying. Both awards give a £15,000 salary contribution and 1 year of support to anyone who has an idea to make education fair. So if you're an FEA member, you can apply for our Entrepreneurship Award, which is led by the wonderful Tish, who is on the call today. And that's designed for innovating within your organisation, so within your FEA member organisation. Or all members of the public, teachers, young people, entrepreneurs can apply for the Innovation Award, which is for early stage innovators to turn an idea into a thriving initiative. So there's a number of sessions throughout the festival where you can hear more about these 2 awards, and the details there at the bottom of the slide for those sessions, or feel free to get in touch with either Tish or Cheyenne with any questions. Tish for the Entrepreneurship Award and Cheyenne for the Innovation Award. So I will stop sharing my slides and we will get started with the session. So we're going to start, as we do with all of our Impact Festival sessions, with some networking for you all to meet each other and get talking. So we're going to have a question that we'd like you all to discuss, and we're going to be breaking you out for 7 minutes to discuss this question, to get us started on the topic of leadership and adapting to change. So I've just actually, my screens have messed up. Tish, could you put the question in the chat, please?
Yep, just popped it in.
Perfect, fantastic. So we're going to break you out into small groups and we'd like you to meet each other, get chatting. And to start us off on this topic, we'd like you to think about the weather and your internal weather. So how are you feeling inside? And think of a weather that describes how you are feeling right now. And also, why is it important for you to be in the session today? So use a weather system to describe how you're feeling and talk about why is it important for you to be in this session today. So Tish will now break us out into small groups and we'll welcome you back in 7 minutes.
Someone just joined. Hi, Sanju.
Hi guys, sorry I'm in transit, a bit late, just trying to juggle making these sessions between a very hectic work schedule. So you guys do this very interesting thing where you do breakouts within the first 2 minutes, which I haven't seen in like other sessions in the past year. So I'm always like, oh shit, I'm meant to be in a breakout. Oh well.
No worries, I can drop you into a breakout. There's one that's just got 2. So if you'd like to say hello to a couple of people, I can move you into a breakout. Or if you'd rather stay.
Actually, you know what? It would be so good to not have to do that.
Sure.
But it's nice to talk to you two. And I don't, you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's when it's just like, oh, running from pillar to pace and I'm basically out of breath. I just feel like it's never a good impression. So
yeah, no worries, Sanju. What's your role and what's your organisation? I don't think we've met yet properly.
No, hi there. So I'm the founder of an education.
I thought I'd start with this slide here, which is the check-in that we just did, only because I really enjoy this check-in. I moved to the UK quite recently, and I've not quite clearly mastered the weather small talk. So this is always a great way for me to really understand how to intelligently talk about the weather. So with that, I'll also introduce myself and also go over the agenda for today. My name is Deena, and I work as the Impact Partnerships Manager at Impact Ed. And previously, I worked in the education and international development sector, including the World Innovation Summit for Education. And I guess why I'm here co-facilitating this session is because of a program that I used to run and manage at the World Innovation Summit for Education called the WISE Emerging Leaders Program that Sam was a part of, and I'm sure is very familiar with some of the sessions we'll be doing today. And the main reason that we led and designed and said the program is still ongoing and running is because there is a clear need within the education and also the larger education and development sector to really rethink how we approach well-being, not just as personal well-being, but also collective and planetary well-being. And at the end of the day, if our goal as people working in the education sector is to have young people flourish and thrive, that in a sense leads to the collective well-being or planetary well-being, and we all are aligned by a similar goal. And at the same time, there are a lot of silos and there isn't a lot of conversation happening around how to link the work that we're doing in our own organizations to this larger vision we all have within the education sector. And one of the main reasons for the program that we designed was to really align and link personal well-being to all these different moving bits and pieces, and to internalize and operationalize some things that we know is important and essential to doing the work that we do and work together, and well-being being a central moving piece of that conversation. So what I'm hoping that we can do in this session today is have a conversation about what that piece looks like for you and your organization with each other. And what's great about sessions like these is to really break some of those silos in which we are especially in right now because of COVID and remote working and just barriers that seem very insurmountable. So how we will design the session, how we'll move forward with the session is we'll start with a keynote from Tom at Barnardo's, who'll be sharing their personal experience of navigating change during the pandemic and working in a charity that supports young people and youth at risk in specific. And from there, we will open a larger conversation around really treading that balance between languishing or the lack of well-being or burnout to really flourishing, not individually, but also collectively, and thinking about the sense of urgency that we often find ourselves in this sector to constantly act now and nothing is ever really enough, and how we can step out of that urgency and really see the community around us that we can seek support from. And then finally, we'll be tying that to notions of collective well-being and also well-being linked to leadership. And we'll be having a breakout session where you can learn from each other and celebrate each other's growing pains and also moments of achievement and joy together, and come back and harvest and check out at the end. So without any further delay, I will start us off by handing it over to Tom, who is going to share their personal experience of navigating challenges and changes during the pandemic at their organization. So I can stop sharing the screen now. So Tom, go for it.
Thanks, Deena. Just give me a nod if you can hear me okay. Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm just going to talk for about 10 minutes. Just around, as you said, our experiences at Barnardo's during probably the most uncertain period I think we have ever had, uncertain and challenging, and I'm sure ever will have, or hope ever will have, which was the last sort of 12 months. So I'm deputising for Javid Khan, who's our CEO. So I worked directly with Javid for the last, well, couple of years actually, around our change programme at Barnardo. So Barnardo's, we're about 150 odd years old. We work with several 100,000 children, young people and their families through 1,000-ish different services that we offer around the UK. And we also have a business of 700 shops that actually I never quite realised how critical that was to us until actually all of those shops closed overnight. And I guess in terms of the context of our sort of period of uncertainty and challenge, I mean, it doesn't take, we're all aware of what's happened in the last 12 months, but just in terms of what that meant for us, obviously, much of our work is delivered face-to-face. And so we needed to protect our colleagues, and there was a real challenge there around how we continue to work with vulnerable children, young people who actually need us more than ever and have done during this period, at the time when we also needed to protect colleagues and adhere to government guidelines, etc., which were changing every day. And I guess alongside that, we, like I've mentioned, our entire estate, our 700 shops closed almost overnight. And so that income, which was about £8 million a month, sorry, not a week, that'd be good, about £8 million a month that we were losing out on overnight. So I'm going to just go through some of our key learnings. Now, I would say this, we're still digesting. I'm definitely still digesting the last 12 months. I think this is the third time I've had the opportunity to just share some of this with an external audience, but I'm sure, and I could talk all day about this and what we learned and what went wrong and what we would do differently, but I was just going to focus on a few key things. So I guess the number one and most important for us was about a focus, or refocus is probably a better word, on why we're here. And what we'll find, and particularly in third sector organisations, I find that because there's so many opportunities and there's so many things and everyone's so passionate, at any point in time, you've got 100 different initiatives going on in the organisation, all for good reason, but they all absorb resources, time, energy. What we really needed to do, and we did this right at the beginning as an executive, was let's just get back to why we're here. And why we're here is supporting vulnerable children and young people through delivering frontline services. That's why we're here. So there's loads of other great things we do around advocacy and around influencing and policy, etc., but what we're fundamentally here for is working directly with vulnerable children, young people. And the impact of that was that our 10-12 page strategy within the space of a month of the crisis was reduced to effectively 3 sentences, which was, we will be here for vulnerable children and young people through frontline services. We'll generate as much net income or profit or cash as we can to support, because we were worried that support was going to drop off the edge of a cliff, and I guess we are still concerned about that. And we will look to challenge systems where we can. So because we do all of this work with children and young people, we have an opportunity to say, this is what works, this is what doesn't work, and therefore let's challenge ineffective systems. But that was a third objective. That wasn't a primary objective. Primary objective was we need to be there for the children that we work with during this period. So actually, I think that's been really helpful for us. It's a refocus. It sounds odd because obviously that's why we're here. But in big organisations, actually, I think in all organisations, you can get pulled left, right and centre with different initiatives. And actually, that refocus was really important and framed all of the decisions that we made and continue to make. I guess the second probably key thing would be around visibility, and particularly the visibility of that key leader in the organisation. Now, again, a lot of third sector charities, not-for-profits do things by committee. They're very collaborative. There's a lot of benefit to that. But actually, in times of severe uncertainty, and we didn't know what the next week, month was going to look like, people are looking for that leadership figure and looking for some calm, some sense of calm and ease. And actually, it's really odd, I found throughout, when the UK was clearly the worst performing organisation early on in the crisis, Boris Johnson's ratings didn't fall off the edge of a cliff. And it's all about like the people's natural instinct is to look for a leader and look for some sense of assurance. And so there needs to be that slight switch in how you operate, and that's what we did. And Javid, who I won't compare with Boris Johnson ever again, but he was very good in terms of delivering regular videos. He was very, very open and honest with people about what we knew, what we could control, what we didn't know, what we were doing about it, who to speak to around different issues, regular videos to the entire workforce. And I thought that was very effective, and also that honesty around the fact, you know, we don't know when this is going to end. There's a severe financial situation we're in, etc., etc. He didn't hide that from the workforce, but it gave that sense of assurance and calm that we were working on it and we would find a way through this. Now, those are both really obvious, but I just think they're the key things that I would highlight and would go back to time and time again, you know, in the next crisis or period of uncertainty. There were just a few other things I was going to mention. So one is around, which is always a big thing for me, and when I'm working with my teams, is around controlling the controllables. So there's so many things that are happening still, but particularly back at the beginning, that we couldn't control. There was so much outside of our control. So for us, it was about, you can get carried away with that and almost have that organizational sort of rabbit in the headlights feeling. Actually, we need to say, what can we control? So we can control how effectively we protect our staff and the guidance we give them, and work really hard to get the right PPE, etc., so they can continue to see vulnerable children, young people. Slightly less interesting, but there's lots of areas of spend. There's lots of places we spend money that we could control, that was within our control. So we were losing money. We couldn't control the fact all our shops are closed, but we could control where we were spending cash, and things around recruitment and consultants and all that kind of stuff you do on a day-to-day. Actually, we put some measures in place that really brought our spend under control. But the other thing about control the controllables is it doesn't mean you don't prepare for what might happen outside. And so this was all about scenario planning. So if anyone's done any business studies, business degrees, A-levels, etc., you talk about scenario planning. Actually, most of the time it feels like a big waste of time, because I think you generally have a good idea where you're heading in normal times. You generally know what policy decisions are coming down the track. You generally know where the economy is going to go. You know, whereas in this period, we absolutely had no idea. We didn't know how long our shops were going to be closed for. We didn't know how long the virus was going to circulate, and actually we still don't. And so really spending lots of dedicated time, energy and resource into mapping out various different scenarios, and then getting our board alongside us to say, okay, if this were to happen, what do we do about it? So we've got plans in place, and it helps with that sense of ease, assurance that actually under no scenario do we need to panic. We were going to really bad worst case scenario that actually was probably never going to happen, but we were prepared. And then I get the final thing, which is some people might be slightly odd, but is around taking the opportunity out of something like the crisis. And necessity is the mother of invention. We were forced into working in ways that we probably never thought we would. So in terms of how we interact with vulnerable children, young people and families, a lot of that went online. And therefore we had to develop new digital products, services, so we could access, so we could reach them. We had a big campaign around getting kit and equipment over to vulnerable children and families. But that's put us in a place now where we can actually think about how we deliver services very differently. So we don't automatically have to go down that a service needs to be delivered face to face, and that's what works for everyone, because that was our assumption. Actually, what we found is, and we continue to research, gather evidence and evaluate, that actually different models of services work for different children and young people. But because of the crisis, we now have the tools, because we've had to. We have the tools to be able to deliver services in many different ways. And there are so many implications of that. Actually, a hybrid model of delivering a service is generally cheaper than having pure face-to-face. It's quicker, you can see more children, you can work with more children, families, etc., etc. And there's so many other ways in terms of how we operate as an organisation, how we interact with each other. There's a really, personally, I hate being at home all the time. I want to see people, I want to interact with people, but it does really break down like silos and barriers. People work in departments, and that's my department, that's where I work. But the fact that now we're all on video, we can reach anyone at any time within reason. means that we are working collaboratively and a lot more effectively across the charity, I think now. And we will never go back to the way we worked before with our hundreds of offices all over the UK. We will come out of this very differently. So that's it. Like I say, I could talk all day, but I'll probably stop there. And they're probably the key learnings for me so far. But as I say, we do have a bit of time to go. I think we're through the worst of it. But yeah, over to you, Deena.
Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing what your experience has been. And I know there are many more stories that are waiting to be told in this meeting around how you've adapted to change and I guess the critical decisions or trade-offs that came with it, and the sense or the lack of control we all felt and are continuing to feel during this period. In the later half of this session, there will be breakout rooms where you'll be able to share your stories, whether that's of growth, worries, or just stories that you want to share in general, and we'll be able to do that. Right now, I will take us back to my slide. Bear with me. After a year of doing this, I still take a lot of time to share my screen. All right, can you see my screen now? Brilliant. All right, there you go. I guess what I will be focusing on in the next bit is really reframing the notion of well-being and flourishing. What has come out from Tom's keynote is that a lot of things we had to reprioritize and change and challenge the status quo quite a bit in the last year as we dealt with uncertainties. And what that means is that we also need to rethink how we are thinking about well-being within our organization and for the young people that we work with. For instance, at Impact Ed, we launched the well-being survey and lockdown lesson survey, where we surveyed over 60,000 pupils to understand their levels of well-being. And we saw that well-being struggled across the board, especially for girls, especially for children eligible for pupil premium. And what this is telling us that well-being is a very dynamic concept, and it's not an endpoint then where we get to and where we achieve this almost holy balance of things being just the right level of intensity, but well-being is constantly threatened by our external environments, the systems that we reside in. But if that is true, if our well-being is affected by systems out of our control, then our systems can also be impacted by our inner state of well-being and inner state of flourishing. So what I'll try to do for the next few minutes is to really have us challenge how we think about well-being as an organization in the education sector, but also within our communities, by really thinking about how our self interacts with systems. So for instance, I think learning happens to storied phenomenon, and I could only share what I know from the experiences I've had in the organizations that I've worked with in thinking about well-being, and what it really comes down to thinking about well-being as harmony rather than balance. And the way we always went about showing this, if this weren't for COVID times, is by asking everyone to try to balance a pen on their hand. And I know Sam is very aware of this little exercise. And when you do try to balance a pen on your hand, on a fingertip, after struggling a few minutes, you will get to it, you will do it. But if you're doing it in a moving train, in a moving bus, while you're pushing your cart at the grocery store, trying to buy supplies for your entire family, it becomes exponentially harder to do and almost impossible. And I think what that's trying to show is that perhaps balance is in what is essential to achieving well-being and to flourish in the environments that we work in, but also reaching this sense of harmony where we know what we can control, as Tom mentioned, and what we will need to challenge, and what is not in our sphere of control. And one way to really think about that is to align that to also organizations and the communities that we work with. At Impact Ed, we work with a lot of disadvantaged pupils and pupils who come from difficult circumstances. That means that the way we think about their well-being is far different to thinking about well-being on a larger sense. because they're also doubly impacted by the systemic inequalities, whether that's racial injustice, whether that's socioeconomic disadvantage or overall learning disadvantages, which means they need additional amounts of support, additional types of services to get to that outcome of flourishing that we want for particular groups of pupils. And this is not something that's unknown in the sector. We take such differentiated approach in the work that we do with the young people that we work with across the sector. But at the same time, we somehow fail to take that approach in the organizations, in the companies that we work in. So for instance, we do know that, for instance, levels of well-being that women and certain communities of color have differs to the rest of the population. So can we really create an environment where we understand how systemic inequalities and injustice and the larger systems we live in impact people's well-being differently, and how can we have an open conversation about what the different needs are and come together? So in a sense, what we have learned at Impact Ed and also in the wider work that we're trying to do is just in the way we think about well-being and flourishing for the young people and for the communities that we work with, we can apply some of those principles back into the organizations that we work with. Because our organizational well-being is intricately linked to the work we can do and deliver for the larger organizations and communities that we work with. And it's not a nice to have, but is an essential component to delivering the work that we want to continue doing. And why I'm starting with this particular, I guess, notion of really rethinking well-being in our organizations and outside is my background. I started my career working in the international development sector, working with refugees at refugee camp. And every few months we would have colleagues leave, promising candidates leave the sector. And this is a sector that's been, and this is a space that's been volatile even before COVID-19 came into the picture, and they lived with the kind of volatility that we are exposed to at the moment. And what we learned from that space was that every few months we had bright young professionals leaving the sector because of burnout. And it didn't come from a place of because they didn't have good routines or good hobbies to keep them going, or they didn't meditate every morning. The fact that burnout was so widespread in the international humanitarian sector is because these larger systems in which we were working in were so volatile, and we felt out of control, and the urgency was too far great for us to overcome individually, and people started to leave. And that became the impetus for the Wise Emerging Leaders program, and also this new way of looking at well-being as a shared reality, as a systemic reality, and to acknowledge that if our systems are the ones that are, I guess, putting us in these states of burnout and exhaustion, then we are also part of the system, and our internal well-being and our internal states of collaboration within our small organization can have an impact on the larger system as well. And to align that conversation, that important conversation, and especially with COVID, this volatility that I experience in the international development sector has become a lived reality for all of us. So I do not have any solutions, of course, but what I will share is a practical tool that you can reflect on and work with yourself. That is the Wheel of Burnout, to really understand the root causes of burnout, as opposed to really dealing on the level of symptoms, which is exhaustion, tiredness, languishing, emptiness, to really think about the wider social and environmental factors, but also material needs, attitudes, and beliefs. And once we do this root cause analysis and have these open conversations with ourselves first, honestly, but also with our teams, we can then prevent that burnout that I first saw in the humanitarian and international development sector, but now it's becoming more widespread. So what I will do is I'm going to drop this tool, which is called the Wheel of Burnout, as something to think about in your own organizations and with yourself, as one tool to think about this. And throughout this rest of the presentation, I'll be dropping different tools in the chat. Unfortunately, I have one screen at the moment, so I'll be doing this in the next slide, but I'll be dropping these tools in the chat box for you to have a conversation and really challenge what well-being is like and what well-being really means in organizational level. And in talking about tools, the next tool I wanted to share, which we won't get into too deeply, is linked to one of the root causes of burnout, is coping with a sense of urgency that a lot of change makers, a lot of entrepreneurs face, is that time is running out. And there is so much to do and very little time left to do. And this scarcity-based thinking is our dominant view of working sometimes, because we do work with some very vulnerable young children and time is running out for them. But at the same time, it's important to understand that that time is not linear and it's not one direction. It can be deep and organic and systemic. And if we see that time can be shared, and this is not just our own personal burden to carry, but one that can be shared across the organization and across the communities we work with, this sense of urgency that often bogs us down can be shared and time can be realized differently. So one reflection that I run in my current team is constantly asking the question, if nothing you can do is ever enough, what can you do? And we can all do something differently, and what we cannot do, that burden or that responsibility can be shared across others in the group as well. And that breaks down this massive overwhelm that we often feel with coping with urgency or change. I'll also be sharing this tool with you in the chat right after this when we go into breakout. And what I'm trying to draw back here is that oftentimes there is a tendency to box well-being as personal well-being and then well-being as the communities we work with, but the link is very unclear. And as my mentor often used to tell me, that self-help is often for people who do not have much help around us, and that is not the sector we work in. There is so much help and support and community around us, and this Impact Festival is proof of that, and how we can leverage that community around us to deal with this urgency that we are feeling. And that is now taking me to our next breakout room, where we can tie some of these things together and really think about the past year that we've had, how we've dealt with uncertainty and challenge. And oftentimes in offline events and in-person summits, there are free times where these stories are shared, where there is room to talk about the growth we've experienced, the worries that's really bogging us down during coffee breaks. And unfortunately, that has become impossible in the past year. But what I'm hoping to do is create these virtual rooms that you can go to and move in and out of, where you can focus on stories of achievement and learning, stories of growth, which will be the second room, or just worries and anxieties. And now this can be personal, this can be collective, and nothing is off the table, because going back to my initial point that if we are a system and if well-being is constantly dynamic and interconnected, what riles us up, what keeps us up at night is not unrelated to the work that we're doing with the communities we want to support. And if we go into a practice as organizations to embed that in our everyday lived realities, well-being could look different and could actually be targeted and differentiated for the different needs that are available, instead of being a standardized approach we take to thinking about well-being as a set of routines. So the hope is that in these breakout rooms, you can talk deeply about some of these questions that I've put in the rooms. I'll be sharing them in the chat as well, but also other things that have come up for you as I went through those previous slides. And so I will give everyone, I'm just looking at the time, maybe 15 minutes in your breakout rooms to really discuss these themes, and also talk about how this links to how you can think about well-being and how you would like to think about it differently as well. So I will turn to Tisha to break us up into the rooms. I will also be sharing those questions again if you haven't had a time to note it down.
I'll break us out now.
Perfect, thank you. Malfunctioning now. There we go. One second. Are we all back?
Yes.
like my mind. I have lots of tabs open on my computer as well. So I'm going to take us back to my slide. There you go. So I guess the next bit would be just really having a more wider conversation about some of the conversations that were had in the breakout rooms, and they were all overlapping themes. And I know I was in the growth room, and it was really wonderful to just have an honest conversation about thinking about how the past year and a half has been the ways we've changed and grown, and that growth is not linear, and how we imagine growth to look like. And some of the themes that, again, is linked to this wider session is around thinking about leadership as vulnerability and being honest about our personal needs, and realizing that our personal needs are not separate from the needs of our organization and our communities if we are to really embody and really work together with our communities. So this is just an open space for, the people from the different groups to share what they discussed, what surprised them, what reflections they've had, or anything else they'd like to share with the wider group and get their thoughts on.
I can kick us off if helpful. I actually joined the worries room, and we had a really interesting conversation about, well, two things. So first of all, as I joined, we were talking about, I guess it's the quote, if nothing you can do is ever enough, what can you do? And the delicate balance between, as leaders in the third sector, challenging ourselves and checking, are we having the right impact? Is what we're doing worthwhile and valuable? Are we using charitable funds wisely and usefully? But also not overdoing that self-critique and self-worry that it ends up tying our hands and becoming almost destructive and a barrier to us achieving stuff. And Antonia talked about very articulately, like that's almost been worsened this year because there's been more decisions to make and more kind of pressure and more acuteness of the challenges we're facing. And so we talked about that really delicate balance between, we have to challenge ourselves, we have to check we're doing the right thing, but calling a line on it and saying, actually, I am doing the right thing, how do I take this forward, and not putting a barrier between us and progress. And then the other conversation we had was Ben asked a really interesting question about, as a middle manager, we're talking about well-being and culture in teams, what middle managers can do vis-a-vis senior leaders in ensuring there's open spaces for people to be honest about how they are and how they're feeling. And yeah, Ben, I don't know if you want to jump in and say anything more about what that meant to you.
To be honest, I'm still sitting here trying to sort of fully think and reflect on what was said for myself. I'm not sure I can necessarily be articulate at the moment, but it is, I think it's interesting. Just across the FEA, we have a real mix, right? So in our group, there was someone from Teach First, enormous organisation, almost 500 people. Some people, very small early stage innovators, organisations with 10 staff. We've got 35 staff, and the kind of I don't think I'd fully appreciated the extent to which organisational size is an important factor when thinking about some of these issues. But sorry, I'm not yet in a position to really articulate thoughts on that.
I did want to add that something resonated with me in that chat, and we did talk about those spaces and almost that creating the safe spaces within our organisation for not necessarily to talk about organisational worries, but to just connect as humans and to connect as people, and to really sort of build up those relationships within a work setting, which will hopefully then create those safe spaces where we can share our worries and be really open and transparent. And perhaps the online world may have taken away some of that, but we can still continue to do this on forums like this. So the chats that you would normally have in the kitchen about things that are going on in your day. So yeah, Sam had mentioned that the work that you've been doing around creating those spaces just to be human and talk and have a bit of fun together sounded really, really positive and seems really important.
I'm happy to add a reflection from our group. We were in the growth room and we were just reflecting on obviously some of the challenges of the last year and how actually like some of the growth is maybe like it's hard to see some of the changes that we've made. I think lots of us reflected that there had been some challenges that you might not have immediately kind of recognized how you'd responded in those, but actually kind of looking back on those, you know, a lot has changed and we have achieved a lot. And then also talks about the power of being really honest as a leader, that building on what had been said earlier, that, you know, we've all kind of had to be vulnerable. Our personal lives and our professional lives have probably crossed over more in the last year than ever before, as we've all kind of faced lots of different challenges. But there's also been a kind of leveling out with that, whether you're CEO or like, you know, a more junior role in the organisation, we've all faced similar challenges. And so actually being open and vulnerable about those, like, I think has been quite inspiring for lots of individuals to see leaders kind of opening up and being honest in that way.
I think this is just a reflection kind of leading on, but I'm in my office today, so that's like a really big thing where, you know, there's no one else here apart from the building manager. But so I had a conversation with her this morning, and it wasn't in a timed timetable or in a Zoom link. It was just standing with our masks on, talking at the door. But it was about our NHS experiences, but it wasn't in a box. And I'm just sort of thinking also that our sense of time and our perspective on time during this period is really interesting, because in a way all those kind of intimate conversations are a bit kind of boxed, and even if you find the space, they're a bit sort of boxed and over focused, and at the same time we're experiencing a lot of change very fast, and we know that we'll reflect on it, and you have to keep that sense of perspective. It's what you were saying about how do you know, we've all grown a lot, but how do we know what we've done? It's being able to hold that longer term view when you're so, as Tom was saying earlier, we still don't really know what the long term's like. We can't sort of plan, you know, we can't have it's very hard to have a very firm vision of the longer term, which was easier before, I think. But I think balancing all those different kinds of ways we experience people within different forms of time is quite a new skill in a way, and a really good perspective to sort of hold in your mind, that there are all these different forms of time. Sorry, that was a bit abstract, but.
No, that's very helpful and linked to what I guess I was trying to get to with this urgency, and that time is just not linear and everyone's experiencing it differently during this time, and how to create space for that different experience, even if that means it would take technically more time to get through these conversations and these to really weed these out internally. And I think it really contributes to more long-term well-being and on every level as well. Before we wrap up, I just want to see if there's any other reflections or thoughts. And I completely take your point, Ben. I know it's a lot to reflect in the short period of time that we have. So yeah, if any other reflections are coming up, feel free to share them. We still have a little bit more time.
I'll come in there, Deena. For our group, we ended up sharing lots of different stories, and two things I guess stuck in my mind. One was a point shared by Louise, in which she was saying that at least this is how I interpreted it, that, you know, sometimes we might be looking to measure how students or young people have gained on maybe academic fronts, their learning or whatever, but there's also a lot that has been gained by young people in the background. It might be, you know, time they've started spending with their family because they can't go outside, or how they're communicating with other family members, how they're sharing with other family members. And so it's making me pause and think that when we're measuring impact, we need to be careful about maybe not being too narrow, that there has been a lot gained, some tangible and some less tangible. So that was the first point. And that's with regard to our audience, so to speak, or those we're working with. And then there were also various stories, I think by everybody really, on realizing how much we surprised ourselves regarding what we were capable of. That you know, there have been so many challenges, and our teams have come together. Each individual has really given more than they might have anticipated they would have been able to give. So it's that positive thing of realizing that actually we have been capable of a lot, and we have come through a lot in the last year or so.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the last point I wanted to pick up there is what you mentioned, Helena, around impact measurement. As someone who works at an organization and all we do is impact evaluation, this is something that I think across the sector we have to be mindful of, at least following this pandemic, is what we are really measuring, and that we begin to really measure and prioritize what we value instead of measuring what is easy to measure, which is often standardized test scores or scores from a survey alone. But we are actually able to measure the impact on things that are more difficult and complex, and there are ways and creative ways to do this, and to be open and to constantly challenge the status quo, to understand and to open up space for these creative ways of understanding how people's lives have changed, or the young people's lives have changed. So completely take that point, and definitely a story that is unfolding for me as well, and us at Impact Ed too. I think I'm going to start bringing this session to a close, but again, this is an ongoing conversation that I hope you're able to have both with yourself, you're able to reflect individually, but also have these conversations with your team at your organization, and we can really start to sort of take some of these learnings into our own organization as well, and not pathologize well-being as something that's individual and that resides in our own realm of control, but well-being as something that's contributed by others, and that's bigger and fuller and more dynamic than being an individual affair alone. And I really hope that's a conversation that can carry on. Before we wrap up, in terms of how we are going to wrap up, it's going to look very similar to how we started. We're going to do another weather forecast about our internal weather systems. How are we really feeling? But also, how are we leaving this session? What came up for you? What are some things that you want to rethink about well-being or leadership that's collaborative and places well-being at the front and center during this time? And how you want to take that forward. We'll be doing this again by going into breakout rooms. And so we'll go into a breakout room for maybe 7 minutes, and hopefully that gives enough time to wrap up. Is that okay, Sam, in terms of 7 minutes? Is that enough time for you to wrap up?
Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. If we can break up into similar groups as the beginning, that'd be great.
Great.
I think we're all back from our rooms. Brilliant. I'll just take my leave here, and I just want to thank everyone for yeah, just participating, sharing your experiences in the different sessions, and also, yeah, for letting me share how I view some of these concepts around well-being, leadership during this time of uncertainty. And I'm also going to drop in the chat the 2 resources, and also just to highlight, there are a lot of resources to think about, to rethink and really question sort of dominant notions of well-being and to really link it to the organization. One of them being Recipes for Wellbeing, which has been sort of an organization that I've worked with closely in the past, and they have a number of resources on their website, which I'll be also sharing the link to, that you can use internally to sort of carry on these reflections that often happen in these workshop settings, but can not find room and time in our everyday schedule. So I really hope you take the opportunity to explore some of these recipes for well-being that are out there that can hopefully sort of embed how we think about well-being differently as we move forward into whatever world looks like beyond this. And I will just drop that here. And thank you all so much. I will hand it back to you, Sam and Tisha.
Thank you so much, Deena. And just to share with everyone, this was a really important and special session for me. I think Deena mentioned at the beginning that I did the WISE Emerging Leaders Programme that Deena organised in 2019, and it was honestly transformational for me. So really wanted to share some of the activities and reflections in one of the sessions at the Impact Festival. So thank you so much, Deena. That was really powerful and useful, and I think helps us to engage in a very different way to sometimes we do in FEA meetings and sessions. So thank you so much. Deena's putting different tools in the chat now. We'll also get those and share them in the roundup for the festival as well. So others who haven't joined this session will be able to access those, and you all will too. Tom had to drop off, but big thank you to Tom as well for sharing his story. I think, as Deena put, stories are so important in this type of activity. It's all about our own experiences, and particularly in the last year. So thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for, I know the room that I was in as well, everyone was opening up so thoughtfully and insightfully, and I know that takes bravery and humility to do as well. So thank you for all your participation. So just to wrap up, we'd love your feedback. The feedback throughout the festival enables us to make tweaks and make sure that it's all running smoothly and it's the right content for you. And obviously thinking about next year when we do all of this again, who knows if it's going to be virtual or physical, maybe a blend. So if we're just going to pull up a poll, and if you could fill that in, please, with your quick feedback. Also, we'll put the email in the chat for you to send any more kind of qualitative feedback for us as we iterate over the next few days. And then there'll also be a survey at the end of the festival about your experiences overall, which we would love for you to complete. So I think the poll, you should be able to see it on your screens now. Let's see people starting to come through. And then after that, we can come off mute, give Deena and Tom a big round of applause, and then enjoy the rest of your days. Go and have a nice lunch.
Got just 1 or 2 more people to vote. Fab.
Thank you so much, Deena.
Thank you.